Russia has withdrawn a third of the forces of the Black Sea Fleet into the waters of the Black Sea. Due to the threats of NATO and the United States, as well as the transfer of significant forces of the alliance to the countries of Eastern and Southeastern Europe, Russia was forced to take countermeasures. According to data obtained by the Avia Pro news agency, this morning Russia launched a third of the ships of the Black Sea Fleet of the Russian Navy into the Black Sea waters, which will work out the protection of the Crimean coast, the Black Sea Fleet's bases, economic facilities, and maritime communications. The start of large-scale military exercises with the involvement of the Russian Black Sea Fleet seriously frightened the NATO countries, especially against the backdrop of artificial inflation by the West of information that Russia plans to attack Ukraine next week. In turn, experts note that the appearance of Russian warships in the waters of the Black Sea will be the best demonstration by Russia that the southern borders are reliably defended, which makes it possible to stop provocations from NATO and the United States. It is known that Russian warships will carry out not only the development of assigned tasks, but also carry out live firing, which will emphasize Russia's intentions to respond harshly to any threats. And in the event of an attack by the armed forces of Ukraine on the Donbass, Russia will be ready to provide cover for the DPR and LPR, where several 100,000 citizens of the Russian Federation live. Meanwhile, the International Center for Strategic Intelligence, ICSI, has introduced a black level of danger on the territory of Ukraine. The recently introduced Red Plus threat level in Ukraine has been changed by the International Center for Strategic Intelligence to Black. This means the inevitability of an armed conflict in the region. The change in the status of the danger occurred after several countries of the world immediately identified factors indicating that an armed conflict in the region would begin next week. This morning, the evacuation of foreign diplomats from Ukraine began. At the same time, experts draw attention to the fact that even if Russian troops have been at the borders of Ukraine for 2.5 months, the current activity of the armed forces of Ukraine indicates that an armed conflict in the region will begin precisely because of the actions of Kyiv, while the West only warms up the current situation, knowing full well that Ukraine is behind the escalation. The current situation in the region has already led to the fact that a number of air carriers have not ruled out refusing to fly over the eastern part of Ukraine, although so far no decision has been made to fly through the airspace of other countries. It should be noted that over the past week, the armed forces of Ukraine have deployed about 10 servicemen, additional artillery, and armored vehicles to the Donbass. Currently, very high tensions remain in the Donbass. A few hours ago, several Ka-52 attack helicopters of the Russian aerospace forces were spotted only 15 kilometers from the border with Ukraine. Combat rotorcraft were in the airspace of neighboring Belarus, and, as the source notes, they could well work out strikes on the territory of neighboring Ukraine. On the presented video frames, you can see how the Ka-52 helicopter is flying in the area of the Belarusian city of Dobrush. However, residents of the Gomel region report that helicopters were also seen near the settlements of Antonovka and Nosovichi, from which the distance to the Ukrainian border is really about 15 kilometers. A few hours ago, residents of Donetsk reported that a powerful explosion had thundered in the vicinity of the capital of the DPR, as a result of which glass had been shattered in residential buildings. Initially, it was assumed that we were talking about an explosion directly on the territory of Donetsk. At the same time, Ukrainian propagandists immediately announced the successful strike on Donetsk with the Tochka operational tactical missile system. As it turned out, the explosion was connected with the destruction of the positions of the armed forces of Ukraine. It occurred not far from the line of contact in the suburbs of Donetsk, although on the territory controlled by the armed forces of Ukraine. Sources report that the DNR units are busy actively identifying the positions of the armed forces of Ukraine in the Donbass due to the expected attack from Kyiv. In this regard, the detected dangerous positions of the enemy are almost immediately destroyed. Judging by the power of the explosion, the strike from the DPR was delivered using 152mm artillery. At the same time, local residents report only one explosion. At the moment, there are no official comments from the armed forces of Ukraine about the strike from the DPR, the destruction, the dead, and the wounded. Considering the data that appeared in the online communities of the armed forces of Ukraine, the explosion actually took place at the positions of the Ukrainian military.